Hello, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Anilesh Mahajan. I'm senior editor with India Today magazine, and I welcome you on behalf of Council for International Economic Understanding. Today, as we all have gathered to hear Ms. Shamika Ravi, Ms. Shamika Ravi has a distinguished career, not only in teaching and research, but also she was part of Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, and she's very respected economist from India. Her infograms, they are much awaited by most of the intellectuals to understand, the trajectory Corona is taking, and and that is probably the reference point at various organizations these days to start their day and to start the planning that which way economy would move and which way they should do the planning. And we thank Shamika for doing this extensive work. This is part of my daily routine. Whenever I get up in the morning, I look for her tweets to understand how she's projecting and she's giving us the projections of the corona graph, because it's numbers are muddling all over. We never know that which way this disease is moving, especially the size of the country is so big and demography is so diverse, so it is very difficult. But thanks to her, we are able to understand. But her subject is also economics. So the country is going through a real dilemma, whether to look for life or livelihood, or can there be a middle path where life and livelihood can go together. So this is the discussion's topic today. To begin the proceedings, may I request Dr. Dwarika Unial. Dwarika Unial heads the research wing of CIEU. Professor Unial, mic is yours.
Thank you, Anilesh, and good afternoon to everyone. It's such a pleasure to have all of you with us today for the second Bauddhik session by CIU. I'm a professor with a university in Pune called Flame University, India's first liberal arts university. I'm the dean there for School of Business. But for CIU, I head the research action group, which is a small group of academicians, researchers, people who are keen, have got a keen interest in understanding policy, keen interest in contributing towards policy making for the government of India and provide inputs and do research on various activities. So we have formed a small network of people, and we would like to, engage with all of you. We'll send you more details about it. It's a group, a small group of like-minded people coming together for nation building, doing some meaningful research, providing some interesting dimensions to the already policy discussions and so on and so forth. So because of that, we wanted to bring in a close-knit group of people on a platform like this. And that's why we have created this program called Bauddhik. Though as a CIU, as Anilesh would tell you, we'll be doing multiple other hurdles and theme-specific, industry-specific discussions across international politics, international relations, economy, trade, and others. Last weekend, we had Dr. Sachin Chaturvedi from RIS and RBI to give a very amazing talk on trade policy and his interest areas. And today, we are privileged to have you, Professor Ravi. Just like Anilesh has said, there's a morning routine for all of us. There are two people I follow religiously, your post on Corona and Dr. Fahim Yunus's ideas about what's really happening around the world. And his understanding of this disease has given us too many interesting ideas and thoughts about it. So today's topic, as Anilesh has said, we would really want to try and understand from you about what is the way forward for us, and where do you think things panning out, especially because it has got impact across the sector of economy, socio-economic impact, industry impact, academic institutions are being impacted, education is being impacted. Not a single, sector or country where it's just not being impacted. So we are so keen to hear your views about it. So without further ado, welcome again at the platform of CIU. We are so happy and privileged, and we are so looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Unyal. To proceed further, I just broadly give you a format. Soon after I finish, I'll request Ms. Shamika Ravi to proceed with her lecture. Then we also have with us Dr. Krishna Gopal Karmakar. He's former Managing Director of NABARD. So he will be discussant for today's evening's discussion. After that, we will allow Shamika Ravi if she wants to give her reply, and then we will have an open house where we can ask brief and precise questions from Ms. Ravi. So then we will have the concluding remarks from Dr. Ashwini Mahajan. He heads Swadeshi Jagran Manch. I welcome you all. I can see some very prominent people from our RSS family who are here. I welcome Professor Rajkumar Bhatia. Like Dr. Ashwini Mahajan, he is also a guiding force for us. He headed ABVP for a long time, and he's trusted name as a RSS ideologue, especially for the economics and social activities. I welcome Dr. Bhatia. Ms. Ravi, you can start the lecture, and all ears are with you. So I would request everybody to mute your mics. Only Shamika Ravi ji will be unmuted, so that we can concentrate on what she is telling us. Thank you, and best of luck, Ms. Ravi.
Thank you, Anilesh. Well, namaskar, everyone. Though remotely, it is always good to be connected. And while we are a small group of like-minded people, the idea is to extend beyond, because I think this is a very powerful thinking in terms of how we envision the future of our nation. And it's important to engage far and wide and to carry our message. So hopefully after the initial formation months of putting this idea together, and I congratulate the team for putting this lecture series together. We will also extend it hopefully to perhaps not so like-minded people. But very nice to be in touch. I see a lot of familiar faces, Ashwini ji. I see Bhatia ji. It's very nice to see somebody from FLAME. It's a university I have kept close watch on because, a lot of these new private universities are experiments for the country. And so far, what successful experiments some of these have been. So again, Professor Unyal, thank you very much for your introduction and opening remarks. The topic for today, while Anilesh, when he gave me that topic, he spoke about life versus livelihood. And that is how a lot of the public debate today is positioned. But I do want to steer you away a little bit and talk about the way I see this as an economist, as someone who fundamentally believes that the factor which determines any country's growth and prosperity is human resource. So it has to be a discussion about life with livelihood. It cannot be one versus the other. And in that sense, let's start off by saying that now it's been 6 months. We have a fair idea of how this pandemic has grown globally. This is a study that just came out 2 days back from the Brookings Institution. This is the economic papers that come out looking at macroeconomic performances in terms of the lost GDP of countries. And of course, every country other than China and Taiwan are showing some degree of decline in growth. What you are seeing is that a very large number of European countries, which were the hotspots for COVID, while suffering huge GDP losses, have also suffered many deaths. So if you look at the COVID deaths per million, which is on the x-axis, you will see that a majority of the Western European countries, Spain, UK, Italy, France, Belgium is off the charts, in fact. Sweden is interesting because they did not have a lockdown, but they have lost many lives. And there has been a certain degree of introspection, not just within the Swedish policy-making circuit, but globally, that could we all have reacted differently? Now, one thing to acknowledge is that no country has come out looking, perfect in terms of having envisioned what this pandemic would look like in its trajectory. It has been a trial and error for every country, and we are no different. But one thing we have to look at when we see the Indian numbers is that India next to Philippines is part of the other group. We have indeed lost very few lives if you compare the global average to the lives claimed by COVID. But we have lost a large part of our GDP, the growth, if you consider the first 6 months. Now, this is telling us a few things. That first of all, there is a trade-off in the way things have been managed globally. We are no different. We have had a huge hit to the economy, and I will try and disaggregate this in a few minutes. But this is just to familiarize you with what is the global context. There are some countries, South Korea, if you look at Finland, Norway, relatively smaller countries, tremendous government capacity, excellent healthcare sector. Now, these are societies which anyway practice social distancing in some form when there is even the flu season. So I think countries are now in a situation where COVID is seeing an interaction with what typical public health practices have been in this country. And for the first time, we are all acknowledging what we have always known, that public health can take a huge beating as far as economic performance of countries is concerned. And in a little while, I'll also talk about why the federal nature of some democracies in India, Brazil, and US in particular make us a little more vulnerable than most small countries that we tend to compare ourselves with. This is the current situation as of active cases. Now, the reason active cases are important to monitor because this is the real demand, or these are the number of people currently with the virus. So a fraction of this, and 10 to 15% is the global average, will require hospitalization or some degree of intervention. So this is the real demand on the health infrastructure of a country. And as you can see, while the US continues with the trajectory, India is beginning to show a peak, a very, very early peak. And mind you, this is a closed group. So this is the first time I'm using that term. Peak has to be very well defined, though it is not. Most countries are seeing their second peaks now, and some have ascended onto their third and so on. So we want to be a bit careful, but what you do see is in India, the active cases are beginning to decline on a daily basis, which means our recovery is very sharp, and the total cases which are being confirmed every day is now beginning to show a flattening or a small decline. And with high recovery, the net active cases, which means the pressure on the healthcare system, that is beginning to decline a little bit. But you can see what is happening. Now, Spain has many more active cases than Brazil. And just 2 weeks back, we knew that, US, India, Brazil, major hotspots, and what the normal press, the view on Brazil has been, that it is one country which has truly floundered. And that's the public health global community's verdict in the way Brazil has handled things. And yet, today Spain has many more cases than Brazil. So that is the nature of this pandemic. That is the nature of this virus. Until you have a vaccine globally, commonly available to everyone, this will keep recurring. This will keep coming up in some form or the other. And we have to learn to live with it. Countries that learn to live with it with minimal lives lost and minimal hit to the economy can say that we have indeed a strategy for handling COVID which has been successful, but too early to call any country a success right now. If you look at the global prevalence across countries, meaning how many cases are there per million in the population. Just look at Qatar, Bahrain, if you look at many of the Middle Eastern countries, in fact, it's shocking how prevalent, how common the infection is in the population, more than 40,000 people per million and so on. And of course, Latin America has had a massive surge. Now, and of course, there's Europe and all, but
I think we have lost connection with her, I think.
Yeah, looks like. Just
You could message her that we have lost her.
Yeah. That I've been doing.
It's surprising how China has the lowest pain from COVID.
Their data, one can't, really know what is the real
Like
data.
Donald Trump was saying the other day, they allowed international travel to continue, where had they, put their own cities in the lockdown. And at that time, WHO was saying that, it can't transmit from human to human. WHO
All
was
kinds of stuff, there were people standing in Italy saying that I'm a Chinese and I don't have the virus and come and hug me. And then the same guy ended up giving virus to some 3,000 people. So all kinds of flimsy things were happening in the Feb and March. And we were really looking at them from the distance. So we didn't realize because we were traveling like that time and we were doing it. It's only after post-Holi that suddenly everybody woke up to the challenge of suddenly it is happening. And then
she said she's trying to reconnect.
Okay. Yeah, but the going out of the cases for Spain is suddenly and especially UK again, where they have to enforce the lockdown, where things were going back to the normal and suddenly it's come back. So I think that something is worrisome. And hence, as Shamika said, we will have multiple peaks at multiple places and, no one, because India is a multiple country system anyway. So you will have, each places will have different kind of trajectory coming up. So that can be tougher.
Aditya, ek bari waiting room mein dekh lena if she is not there.
she's not there. I guess must be a.
Actually, we are all working from home, and this electricity is a big problem. The fluctuation which happens and that abruptly breaks things.
It happens across, we in Pune, we have on Thursdays, we have a power cut in the city. So once we did a faculty meeting only to realize that half of the people can't join because they have a power cut in there and the things were happening multiple. Then we realized that Thursday is the day where we can't have any of those meetings or things like this. So when classes happen,
This has been going on for years. I think Thursday is the maximum peak for industries, I think.
Industry. Yeah, I think it's been the case. Yeah, there's some method to the madness where the power cut happens.
I have one query, just to keep the discussion alive. Are we overreacting to COVID? I'm talking in terms of the Spanish influenza in 1918. About 1.9 crore Indians died at that time. And the same panic, same problems. People could not go for work and all that. Of course, social distancing was not there, but people are afraid to move out. But the number of deaths in India was terrible. If you had about 5 crore all over the world, about 2 crores were from India.
Yeah, but India was very different India then in terms of healthcare and the kind of economy and the activity sets and people and lifestyle and everything else. I think a century ago, what was India, and today I think even our freedom fighters and others can't even imagine if we time travel them here. They will never be able to imagine this is India we're looking at.
There was no penicillin that time. Here there is no COVID vaccine. So we are all hoping for that. Penicillin came only in 1945 for the general public. It was there for the army people in the Second World War. But basically,
I think the value of human life has gone up, both personally as well as institutionally.
Yeah.
Good, she's back.
Sorry about it.
No, we were keeping ourselves busy with some interesting anecdote.
I can imagine with the group.
With Mr. Karmakar throwing up a very interesting question to all of us. I think we'll discuss it post your session is over. That's an interesting question to answer. Please go ahead.
So I hope you can all see the screen. I put it back to where, okay. So we were talking about the prevalence, how the prevalence globally, we are ranked around 72. Now these are confirmed cases, which means these are based on the tests. If you look at the antibody tests that have been carried out, the seroprevalence surveys across India, then we know that the prevalence is obviously much higher. But within that context, I think it's important to appreciate, therefore, that the infection fatality rate is obviously much lower than the current number, which is around 1.5%. But these are confirmed across the different countries, and you can see that India is ranked number 72. So even in terms of the prevalence of the infection in the common population, we have sort of escaped the worst, if you consider Latin America, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and a large part of the Middle East. What about COVID death per million? Well, just look at countries like Peru, Belgium, 966 deaths per million, 860 deaths per million. Now, against that reality, if you look at 66 deaths per million, which is the latest figure for India, it does seem like it is far less fatal in India compared to many of the other countries. Now, there is underreporting. Of course, we have always known that reporting of death. If you know death certificate, birth certificate, even in our most digitized and highly, states advanced, which do keep good records of birth and death, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, etc. Even there, death registration or death certificates, etc., are obviously much below 100%. It seems to be the case in a lot of the OECD countries, etc. But even if you account for underreporting, the death rate per million in India seems to suggest that it is less fatal in the way the numbers are coming up, because clearly we are not seeing the kind of death rate which other countries are seeing, meaning we would have had more than 10 lakh deaths up to now, and clearly we haven't reached a lakh yet. Now, one important thing I want to sensitize you to with is, in India, we lose infectious diseases is not new to us. Of course, COVID is normal and therefore it is scary. People are worried. There is a great degree of uncertainty which is related to that. But we have been living with TB. We lose on an average just approximately 4 lakh people a year to TB, which is a very big number. Now compare that with the COVID mortality, and it gives you a sense that yes, of course, it's new and it is unknown and it is frightening. However, the larger context gives you a sense of how does this compare with other infectious diseases that India has been living with. It's a very large country, and which is why I think when we compare waves of smaller country, it's a bit naive because comparing large federal democracies like the US or India or even Brazil, where states have considerable say, and there are many state administrations and even district administrations which have a tremendous say in the way the pandemic is managed. And when you compare these large federal countries with smaller European countries, it's almost, it's not a fair comparison. Now, India has states the size of countries. And obviously you are seeing that in terms of prevalence, huge variations. So while at an all India level, we are about 4,273 cases per million population. Goa obviously is close to 20,000. Pondicherry, very high. Delhi, almost 14,000 cases. Now these are very high compared to Madhya Pradesh, Bihar, Mizoram, Meghalaya, many states of the Northeast where the prevalence is much lower. Now, mind you, testing is not the answer to a lot of these, because the testing in a lot of the states in the Northeast, etc., other than Nagaland, they have managed to keep test positivity rate below 5%. So it is not that they have been testing less, or Bihar for that matter. I think Bihar and Uttar Pradesh are not getting right now the sort of the due which they deserve for the fact that they are doing far more testing, and they are reporting far fewer deaths than many of our hotspot states. So even in terms of just the testing efforts, it seems to suggest that the variations are enormous across the country. If you look at the death rate, again, very high. Pondicherry, Maharashtra, I think now we can, now we can agree to the fact that it's 6 months. And here is a state which we are struggling with because, it has 5 of the largest hotspot districts out of the 10 biggest hotspot districts in the country. 5 are from Maharashtra. Maharashtra has always had the highest and increasing test positivity rate in the country. Now it is above 20%, which means that we are doing very little testing in the state of Maharashtra. Now, this is a state which pretty much determines the trajectory of the infection in India. So you have to appreciate the fact that when we talk of peaking, or when we talk of trajectory, or even the economy, and I'll talk about the economy in a minute, the fact that we have major, strategically very important from the economic perspective, states like Maharashtra battling and not doing a very good job, unfortunately, of the pandemic, it makes us particularly vulnerable from the economy perspective as well. So we'll get to that. But again, huge variations in terms of deaths. This is the growth rate of active cases. And the reason I follow active cases closely is because it determines the real demand on the health infrastructure today. Many people are recovering. Most people are recovering at home with minimal interventions. And like you guys, I also follow a lot of doctors, and I'm trying to read up a lot of literature, a lot of public health professionals, a lot of WHO, the protocols and guidelines that regularly keep coming up. I'm monitoring ICMR notices almost on a daily basis. But despite all of that, one thing which is becoming clear lately is that, first of all, across the lockdowns, we've had a slowdown of the active cases itself. Now, remember, overall numbers which you see daily, that is increasing. But that is the thing about growth rates, that the infection is exponential in nature. But thankfully, while it is growing at a cumulative level, the speed is slowing. And this is across the different lockdowns. In fact, post-lockdown, we have struggled. If you see the fact that post-lockdown, the growth rate of active cases has remained, around 2.5% to 3%, and it's only now that we have again begun to reduce that speed further. In fact, for the last 1 week, we have been seeing a decline, so a negative growth rate, and this is a very welcome relief because we are the last amongst countries to see this kind of a slowdown other than the US. Now, yes, testing is a big issue to also consider here. But the good thing is that other than about a period of 7 days in between, which was last week, testing per day, this is the 7-day average. So the good thing is you don't have to look at day-to-day fluctuations in any of these things. By the way, even these are not day-to-day fluctuations. These are 7-day averages. So these are relatively smooth and a long-term trajectory, which is robust. Similarly, daily testing has been rising dramatically. In fact, we were testing very little in the first few months, but since then we have really scaled up. And barring a decline in about 7 to 8 days, end of September, we are seeing that it is beginning to pick up again, and rather sharply, because people are paying a great deal of attention. In fact, testing has become a good proxy for how much effort the states are truly putting into containing, because we don't know much about contact tracing, what is happening. The data is not public. We don't really know in terms of comorbidities or what is the kind of complications the different states are struggling with. But from the testing data, we seem to be doing, again, picking up well. This is an overall what is happening to the case fatality. Globally, the case fatality, meaning out of 100 infected people, out of 100 infections or cases, how many deaths do we have, fatalities? And you can see that steadily this is falling, not just globally, but also in India, and very, very consistently. This is the case not just at an all India level, but across most of our states as well. So barring Punjab and even Tamil Nadu, which has now reversed, Kerala, which is seeing a small increase, and Assam. All other states are reporting consistently declining case fatality rate. Now, there are many reasons for this, but the one which seems to be the most sort of a logical explanation, because we do understand the virus a little better. We do understand the nature of complications given comorbidities. But what I think we have a much better knowledge of is the different protocols at the different stages of the infection. That there is no need to push people into hospitals if they don't really. Most people are going to recover on their own. If there is hospitalization, what should be the protocol? If it is ICU, what should it be? We all said ventilators in the beginning, and subsequently the research is showing that oxygen cylinders and support might actually be far better than putting them through ventilators, etc. So, there is more knowledge today. about how to handle. And I think better developed and refined protocols for the entire sort of life cycle of the infection is what is leading to better management of this across the different states. And that is what fatality numbers declining is what better management is meant to pick up. Now, this is something that had come out in the beginning of the pandemic. This is a Lancet study from the Population Council. They came up with a vulnerability index for different states of India. How vulnerable is a state? And this was based on the socioeconomic vulnerability, ownership of asset, population, which is SC/ST, education levels, older people, because they are most susceptible, population density, urbanization, housing, hygiene condition, what is the availability of healthcare in the state, and the epidemiological factors, meaning proportion of men between 15 and 49 years who have certain kind of comorbidities. Now, based on these 5 factors, India states were ranked in terms of their vulnerability index. And if you see here, then Madhya Pradesh, Bihar, Telangana, these are states which came out highly vulnerable to COVID. Okay. Now, this is of course in the beginning, when we're all trying to figure out what is the infrastructure required, how do we protect the elderly. So these are the kind of factors that went into calculating this. And yet today, this is what the data shows. The data is telling us that there is almost no correlation between vulnerability score, the way we understood in the beginning, and the death rates today. So if you're seeing that there is no obvious relationship between how the different states have managed vis-a-vis the vulnerability. Now, I'll get to an alternate measure that we have been thinking of, but to give you a sense of the macroeconomic perspective, because at the end of the day, I am an economist, and my biggest concern behind all of this is what's happening to livelihood, what is happening to economy. How much longer are we going to continue to consume less, work less, and invest less? Now, we are going to look at different kinds of data. And I think that is the one innovation that we have to take recourse in. That, we don't have, though Digital India has been a huge success in terms of digitizing a lot of data, but our not much data is available to analyze. So we always have to look at novel ways of, because real time, these are not problems for which we can wait for the NSS to carry out a survey and then analyze and so on. We have to look at alternate. And I think Google data is quite promising. Mobility data, which picks up, how many people are still going to work, because they do identify workspace by regular movement of people from one place to the other. They know what are residential and what are workplaces. The movement to commercial centers like restaurants, cafes, malls, etc., etc. So these kind of data sets, these are large data, so it's big data, and the trends give you some insights. For me, the most interesting thing is it allows me to compare or look at how this massive country, 1.38 billion people across all these big states and units, how are we performing across different states by looking at these novel real-time data. And the second is the NREGA data, that the Manrega data tells us in terms of what is happening to, we know that the economy is down, but what is happening to the social security support in the form of workfare, which is a right to rural households in this country. So these, when we started putting out these graphs on the social media, this in fact, it coincided with the day when Prime Minister Modi put out the peacock pictures. And, all these graphs do actually represent, they do look like lovely, beautiful peacocks. But these more graphs, they're telling you that, first of all, work from home, if you look at the mobility trend, then India is, it's average. It's not looking very, too bad or too good. Brazil, for instance, minus 17% still. So around 17% fewer people today are traveling to workspace. In India, it's about minus 30%. Places like the US and UK are higher, US particularly, but I think it's not a sign of a weakness. Remember, these are also economies which are very well connected. So it also shows that you can possibly work from home and maintain high levels of productivity. This is showing movement to retail. So how much economic activity is happening in the country? This is a way to measure that. And we are seeing in countries like Germany, for instance, they are positive. They have gone above the pre-COVID so 8.6% above the pre-COVID time. France is negative, Brazil negative, India. And this is the thing we have to now try and solve this problem. That in India, despite a relatively low infection rate, despite relatively low fatality at the end of the day, our economic inactivity or decline in economic activity has been very large. In fact, over the last few months, in a lot of my meetings with diplomats from European countries or Latin America, most of them seem to be a little puzzled that why is it that despite the fact that while Indian death rate is low, the fear here is much higher. So we are seeing that the decline in economic activity in India it sort of belies the reality of the infection, at least in terms of the way we are picking up from the mortality, that while fewer people are dying and infection rate is lesser than most of Europe or other OECD markets, our economic activity is far from having picked up. So we are still 31% down as far as the retail and recreation sector is concerned. Very large country again, so huge variations. But what you do see is Maharashtra, amongst the large states, Maharashtra has the slowest pickup. So Maharashtra is still minus 42%, right? So from the February last week, that is the pre-COVID time, and after that, of course, the lockdown, it all crashed in every country and here in every state. We are seeing that many states have picked up far better than Maharashtra. Right? Delhi, Maharashtra, Karnataka. Now remember, the infection in these places is also high, but in a minute I'll tell you that there is more than just the infection. There is also fear. If you look at retail, again, Maharashtra is minus 43%, so it's still a long way from going back to pre-COVID time. UP, you will see, and Bihar is in fact even lesser, is not so badly off. So these are the numbers in this dumbbell form. What this is telling you is that decline today in the economic activity is least in Bihar. It's about minus 11%. Smaller states and many of the Northeast, Manipur, Mizoram, Nagaland, huge declines, right? Almost 50%. Goa has very high. Maharashtra is the highest amongst big states. At an all India level, this is 31. And yet Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, the usual suspect, our most vulnerable states, the way we thought about COVID. And absolutely from the public health perspective, these are states which have some of our poorest health infrastructure. These are states which seem to be doing relatively better, even in terms of economic activity. In terms of NREGA, if you look at MNREGA application for new cards, you are seeing that UP has had an 11.23% increase since last year in application for job cards. Now, if you look at these numbers, they very closely mirror the reverse migration into these states. So the largest migration that happened away from our industrial corridor of Gujarat, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, etc., towards the eastern, more agrarian part of our economy, UP has seen the biggest reverse migration. So it's not surprising that the job applications have been highest in UP and Jharkhand. Now, a little bit, I'll give you a sense of what have some of the surveys that have been done by NCAER, phone surveys, 3,500 people, so not very large, not very representative, but remember it will be a long time before which an NSS or a large survey will be conducted. So we have to look at these small, fragmented new data sets to read into what is happening. From the NCAER survey, 85% households experience some decline in income. So there has obviously, and this is not a surprise to anyone, the decline has been much larger in urban areas. The worst affected, if you look at the magnitude of impact, that the daily wage laborers have been worst affected. Second worst, of course, are the small business owners, then the salaried owners, and then farmers. So farmers in India, on an average, have been relatively unaffected compared to most other categories. Now, if you look across occupational groups, then even amongst the salaried, there is a huge variation between government employees and the private employees. In fact, government employees have been relatively well protected, and this goes to show why in our country we still prefer government jobs. Because, at times like this is one sector where you have not seen any decline. Now, of course, there is the fiscal side of the story that should government continue to match salaries, etc., at a time like this. So those are bigger debates. But this is what the survey is reporting. The private sector tells you that 35% did not receive salary. Now, these are in the first 3 months. So I don't know if it is still continued in the the last 3 months, which is 6 months now. But 35% households reported a decline and 35% reported not receiving any salary. So you are seeing the private sector has been impacted in the urban area in very big ways. In terms of small business owners, 63% closed down businesses. 61% that typically hire workers did not retain any worker. And of those that did not close, 37 paid partial salaries and 39% could not pay at all. So in the first 3 months, now of course, remember the Google mobility, there has been a pickup. There has been a pickup because the initial decline was 75, almost 80%. And that is the time when you're seeing this massive. So it has been a pickup, but these are the initial shocks to the labor market. In terms of casual workers, agriculture workers were least affected. Construction workers were worst affected. And the biggest challenge for casual workers is to go back to get work is transportation. So currently, transport is the biggest bottleneck. Of course, that requires much larger, cross-state management, etc. So we came up with an alternate score in terms of, proportion of households, for the labor market. So not just from the health perspective, but from the labor market, what are states which are particularly vulnerable to this pandemic? And here, if we look at proportion of households which are engaged in casual workforce, those states where you have larger share of casual workforce are particularly vulnerable, and that too in urban areas. Proportion of urban population, higher dependency, states which have older population are more vulnerable. Of course, in a state, if a larger workforce, larger fraction is engaged in construction, or retail and wholesale trade, which have been worst affected, travel and storage, accommodation, food services, etc. These are sectors that have been hit hardest. And of course, what proportion of regular wage salaried employees don't have any social security benefit? So this is the way we define vulnerability, and then we get a score like this. Now, how do we get a score like this? It is largely on account of the fact that these are the various things that add up to give you a vulnerability score. So you have a state like you have almost 45% proportion of workers which are in these sectors which have been hit hardest. Dependency ratio is very high. It is a relatively older population compared to. But look at Jharkhand. Jharkhand has a dependency ratio which is even higher. If you look at Delhi, then the proportion of people in urban areas, of course, Delhi has some pockets, but it's largely, and that's why Delhi, Mumbai and all have been hit hardest by this pandemic. But to me, a surprising fact was, look at Punjab, for instance, 62%. If you look at proportion of regular salaried employees who do not have any social security benefit, meaning there is no written contract, there is no sense of health insurance or the kind of social security benefits that we think of when we compare it with government jobs. So when these proportions are very high, Andhra Pradesh, 50% of the regular waged employees do not have any form of social security. That makes, these states therefore have sort of a larger vulnerability. And you aggregate this and you get. So I want to conclude by basically saying the full recovery will take time. But what the data from the northeastern states, the data from many other states where the infection is not that fatal or not that widespread, even there the decline in the economy is pretty large. And that is where I think we have to do a better job of managing fear and managing this complete panic which has stricken the Indian economy, where I think there is a certain, petrification that people, we have stopped doing many things. Of course, consumption is very low, but so is, working, which is economic activity, and of course, investments are down. So we need to manage the fear better. And I think that is where the role of the central government, the role of Ministry of Health in putting out information on a real-time basis, saying, look, we have, this is the, at a district level, these are the number of people who were diagnosed after, tested positive, but look, these are the people who've recovered, these are the complications, there are so many beds available, the testing is easily available. It's been 6 months, so many states are doing that. But I think it is the fear which is stemming out from lack of knowledge. And of course, the media is not helping at all if you consider the widespread fear, just completely uncontained. And that sort of ties in with the observations. If you look at the observations of a lot of our European friends who tell us that why are Indians particularly scared? And I think we are scared because we don't have enough information and because our healthcare infrastructure is rather limited. And I think more credible and regular information from the government will help us in not just managing our lives better, but that is the tenet of economic policy making. Economic policy making is largely about reducing fear and uncertainty, because when people are fearful, they don't consume, work, or invest. And I think that is the reason why we are talking about another stimulus, or why we need sort of a renewed intervention from the governments at the different levels. So I'll stop with that. I'm very happy to take questions.
Thank you, Shamika. It was wonderful and very insightful, and I am sure you must have spent so much time in researching for this. I have really enjoyed listening to your, your insightful lecture. I'm sure everybody must have enjoyed a lot. Now, may I request Dr. Karmakar if he can give his discussant remarks.
Okay. It was really very interesting because she has really worked hard and given a lot of data. I mean, I think there was tremendous data overload. It was really great because she has done state-wise analysis, and which we do not have enough adequate example. And, finding that the fear factor is pretty high. I think that is something which is, I will come back to the question which I raised earlier. Are we overreacting? This is for Shamika. When you were off the air, we were discussing about this. Now, we had a similar situation in 1918 when Spanish influenza was there. About 14 million in British India, 5 million in the remaining parts of India, about 19 million died. And these were mostly in the 20 to 30 age group. And there was, for 3 or 4 months, there was total panic. People, especially because it started from Bombay. So I was going through all the newspaper coverages. People stopped going out of the house. And basically, there was their same panic, fear, which you are telling, which has hit. Then there was no cure that time, as there is no vaccine today. There was no penicillin or anything available in those times. So, and you won't believe it that Mahatma Gandhi and Munshi Premchand were also affected and they got cured. But Rabindranath Tagore came out with an Ayurvedic cure and did a lot. I think all these Ayurvedic cures really helped in stopping this plague. And of course, cleanliness and all these were taken care of. Then another thing is the incidence of plague. I was looking at the incidence of plague right from 1896 till till 1997, 1957. So plague for about 20 years from 1896 to 1916 was pretty high. Then it came down very much because I think, sanitation and safety and all these measures. So there is a time lag. I would like Shamika to comment on this. Is there a time lag in all these preventive measures, sanitation and safety, which is yet to kick in? Would you like to comment on that?
Are you through with your remarks, sir? Should we move to Shamika back? Sir, please unmute yourself. Dr. Karmakar, please unmute yourself. Yeah.
Then, so the vulnerability index which he has made was amazing. I really liked it because all this time I have been thinking of vulnerability as regards livelihoods, not so much knives. Now I think she has brought in a new aspect about the lives in vulnerability, and that was very interesting. The most important factor was about the daily wagers versus the salaried. I think this is one very important aspect which needs to be discussed, because people who are daily wagers, they are the most vulnerable, marginalized people. And we have seen this from the data also. It is corroborated that without saving, without jobs, without food and shelter, people started vacating, leaving, and just walking across back to their homes. And many died on the way. Of course, the state governments did not really react in time. And that was a problem, that looking at the migrants. Second, we look at the lost economy. So lost lives, lost livelihoods, but lost economy now, which I think Shamika has mentioned about the various aspects. It was very interesting. Lost workers in urban areas especially, then lost wages, lost health, then the economy hard hit, poor production, and which is not borne out by the mortality rates. So somehow the fear factor has to be now factored in into our economic analysis. Then we come to, creating millions of jobs. I was happy to read that in Uttarakhand, the villages which had been lost over the last 10 to 15 years, the upper reaches especially, all these people have come back to the villages and now they're farming. Of course, they're not earning as much as that, but the farming operations which had been halted are now coming back. So that is maybe because it's only temporary and they may go back to their places of work wherever they are. But this is something interesting. One very interesting thing which was mentioned by Shamika, which I would like to touch upon, is agriculture. Agriculture is basically not affected. We have seen this. About a month back, I was on a webinar in the Calcutta School of Business, and we talked about the supply chain and the value chain. What is the effect of COVID? This was about a month back. And it was very interesting to know that the whole supply chain has been disrupted. But because agriculture was localized, it has not affected much. Maybe to an extent in pulses and in oil seeds, because we depend on Indonesia and Malaysia for palm oil, and also pulses, Turkey and Australia and Burma, where we import pulses. But basically vegetables, fruits and all these are now localized. So it is really interesting to note that agriculture has not affected because of the localized production. But that is the but. I would like to talk about that also. When we talk about farmers, we talk only about farmers owning land. Women farmers are not given they're not called farmers. Secondly, agricultural laborers are also not termed as farmers. I think if we take into account women farmers and the agricultural laborers, I think there may be a very different analysis. I would like Shamika, if she could talk about that also. We are not calling them farmers. Somehow we are not including them in the analysis. So creating millions of jobs, I think, in rural areas where people have gone back, and to try to retain them. Uttarakhand is trying, Himachal is trying, many other states, smaller states, they are trying to look after their local people. So creating millions of jobs in rural areas and in urban areas also in these smaller states, I think that is a very big factor. And also removing restrictions. We have a lot of restrictive practices which have been brought about by bureaucracy. Can we remove those? This is the right time for doing that. I think the government has really done a lot in the health systems, in rebuilding the economy, in the education system. The national education policy has been put in, and really interesting. So in microeconomic initiatives, that is, I think, yet to be taken by the states. Macroeconomic reforms. I think on agriculture front, I am really happy about the 1 week back, whatever steps were taken. But certain other steps, for example, banking, macroeconomic reforms are lacking. Banking, administration, judicial systems. You wait 25 years for a case to be resolved. I think these are the things which I think need to be looked after in the macroeconomic situation. I think I have put in a lot of questions, and I hope Shamika and others will also help in this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Karmakar. Thanks for your remarks. Shamika, you can reply and then we can open the house for questions. And my request to everyone is if they have questions, they can put it in the chat room, or there is a digital hand which they can raise, and then I can come back and ask, ask them to ask questions physically. Thank you.
So on whether we are overreacting, you see, I think this is where the fear is that, this is the case of if you do, you're damned. If you don't, you're damned. I mean, no country, and that's why I started by saying no country can claim to have handled this well.
True.
Now, I think it's, to say we are overreacting would put the onus on us, which is people. Now, I don't think people by and large are irrational. If they are fearful, then there is a reason for that fear. In large states where the pandemic is still rising from a daily perspective, Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, I think in those places when we see that there is less movement or economic activity has declined a great deal, we understand. It's quite understandable. But in other states where the pandemic has not hit as hard or the fatality is much lower, or, in those states, people are fearful, but because those are also states which have very, very poor public health infrastructure. Now, this is an infectious disease. So in states like Madhya Pradesh, UP, Bihar, Rajasthan, where public health infrastructure is not adequate, in those places, private healthcare is what a majority of people go to when they seek care. Unfortunately, this pandemic has once again made it very clear to us that there is a distinct role for public health in any country, particularly infectious diseases, because the cost of infectious disease is such that private healthcare is unlikely to come out and be able to internalize or provide, this kind of, or create capacity to manage such large infectious disease, burden. The burden of infectious disease will always rest on public care, just like TB. That's why the comparison with TB is very important. In fact, the last announcement that was made by the finance minister was regarding enhancing the district hospital's capacity for infectious diseases. She said we should create an infectious disease ward in every district hospital in the country. Yes, because that is not limited to COVID alone. Even let's say in 5 years when, let's say this, the vaccine is available and we are all over it, though I doubt, it will be like a form of flu for which we do have a vaccine. But even then, TB will remain. TB is today one of our biggest killers, and it is an infectious disease, and the onus of that sits on public care. So people are not irrational. I think what we need to do is more from management perspective. And I think this is where government communication has to be much better. It is not okay not to talk to people. And I mean this right from the top, from the central government, and I mean the ICMR, I mean NCDC, I mean Ministry of Health, all the way down to district administration. You see, an individual citizen's experience in this pandemic is not determined by what Prime Minister Modi says. It is dependent on my chief medical officer, that how many beds are available in my block and where can I get tested. So I think that information, the more we put out that information and the more we continually keep building that capacity, the fear will that is the best way to dispel fear. So I think I wouldn't term it irrational, but at the same time, if communication is what is going to help us renew the economy, then we better get on top of it. And I think beyond communication, of course, I do think we will need to do more from the economy perspective. Yes, demand is down, but this is a time when even if we had, and we've heard many people, and I think even Raghu and I think Abhijit Banerjee, etc., have also mentioned that direct benefit transfer. Now, the problem is that at a time like this, when you have a cash transfer or a UBI type of scheme, if I put money in every Indian's pocket, it is unlikely to get translated into demand. Simply because when you have so much risk and uncertainty and fear, and mind you, we might dispel the fear, but the uncertainty will remain till you have a vaccine for everyone. So under the current circumstances, a UBI is unlikely to transfer into active demand. And in economics, and most of you who are from the business background, you're familiar with precautionary savings. Households will save the money. They might spend some of it, but by and large, people will save if we think that this is required for a demand perspective. Now, from the vulnerability, when we're thinking of humanitarian support, yes, the first set of announcements were all targeted to construction workers. If you remember, there were self-help groups, the PDS, the PM Kisan was front-loaded. So I think there were well-targeted transfers announced to the segment of our workforce or our population, which are particularly vulnerable. So it's understandable why that focus was there in the beginning. But now I'm talking more from the economic activity, what is required to pick up. And I think that is where, without calling it a stimulus, we need to now come up with a comprehensive plan for economic recovery. Because clearly the disease burden is not as bad as it has been made out to be. But we need to not only communicate, but actually have a strategy. So I think it goes beyond communication. Migrant issue, I'm very glad you raised the migrant issue, because people have gone back home. But remember, a lot of those who have gone back home are the ones who were there for seasonal migrants. And that to a small part of them. But of course, it was still, large in terms of the magnitude of people moving from one part of the country, which is urban to rural areas. I think in many ways, I do think the media did play it up. And I think that added to the panic and the fear and the uncertainty. And the fact that large federal countries, where state is what, eventually going to prevail on a lot of the health policies. This is the reality of large federal countries. But I think the migrant problem we could have handled it better. I think we could have fed people for 6 months if we had planned better and gotten the states to play ball. I think the point on agriculture, very well taken. But remember, COVID is an urban phenomenon still. Even today, the largest number of cases that are coming out are still very much the existing hotspots and the big cities. Now, rural areas, we don't know whether in the long term, or let's wait another 6 months and see, but rural areas, remember 75% of India's healthcare infrastructure is urban. So if COVID goes into rural areas, we have a much bigger problem than to worry about. Agriculture has been unaffected, but I don't know how much of it is luck and how much of it is planning, but we shouldn't rest on that luck or the planning. We have to actively intervene. And I think the recent reforms, of course, are much bigger, strategic sort of structural reforms, which were long overdue since 1991. So I think we've heard a lot of the agriculture economists and experts talk about that. Ease of doing business and the broader issues that Mr. Karmakar, you raised, those are all very well. I think those are points, even in terms of attracting, large manufacturers away from China, let's say, or just, the Atmanirbhar Bharat, sort of the clarion call that we have given ourselves, that will require for us to improve ease of doing business further and further. Now, we have come a long way in the last, let's say 7 to 8 years. But if you recall, from 2012 onwards, private investment has been declining in India. And of course, the retrospective taxes and of course, the coal allocation judiciary is very much a part of that decline. So those are much bigger structural, and the banking sector is a large part of that problem. So I think there are fundamental works still cut out I think, for the government. But in many ways, the new education policy, the big agriculture reforms are all absolutely in the right direction, long overdue. And I'm glad we've gotten, we are waiting for the labor codes now. We'll see eventually what the states do. The center has just given more sort of authority to the states to enact the kind of labor laws which they want. And of course, we have seen UP, Rajasthan, UP, Gujarat, and Madhya Pradesh take some initiative. Because it's important. These are also states that have seen a massive inflow of migrants. So now a large part of it will be how much work can be locally provided. And I don't mean Narega. Narega is not, well, it is work, but it is much more social security. It's a safety net. We have to think of work from actually growth enhancing or improving business climate so that there is more investment. And we have sustainable growth in these states which have huge potential for growth and which will require these kind of long-term reforms. So I'm happy to take more questions, but I think that broadly answers.
Yeah, but Shamika, I have, COVID, I did my bit of research on rural sector and agriculture as such. The growth in agriculture sector, which NSO is putting up, is largely because of the government procurement. And secondly, our dairy sector, because of the infrastructure which we have for dairy, they were able to dehydrate milk into the powder form, and they were able to save the save their produce from getting waste. But people who are selling vegetables, fruits, they suffered a lot because they were not being able to reach APMC mandis. They were not being able to sell their produce to their procurement agents, and then they had to sell it locally. There they got peanuts for their produce. That is the precise reason why Government of India came out with this ordinance rather than bill, so that people get some relief or the other if somebody wants to get a deal stitched. And secondly, about the rural spread, I have traveled to various parts of the country. Unfortunately, this disease is spreading in the rural parts. And unfortunately, what is happening in the rural India is that people who are asymptomatic, they are refusing themselves to get tested. So that is another challenge which state governments need to address. Because, I visited Punjab's few villages. So there, Gurdwaras are making announcements that if somebody is asymptomatic, they need not to get tested. And panchayats are passing resolutions. So this phenomena is happening in Rajasthan. This similar thing is also happening in Gujarat, Maharashtra. So, there has to be some awareness which needs to go to, the local government level, so that, they should be prepared that what needs to be done. Right now, what is happening is that contract tracing is happening, and then, people are reaching those villages. So there is much more needs to be done to make people at the bottom of the pyramid, especially in the rural India, made aware that, oh, okay, this disease doesn't mean that you will be killed. Because this is one of the biggest fear, that if, I get this infection, I will be killed. And what is happening is that since they are resisting, there is a delay in reporting these cases. And if I take Punjab's example alone, 70 to 80% of deaths which Punjab is reporting, people are getting hospitalized only 48 to 72 hours before their death. So that is also leading to multiple problems. So probably, there could be some avenues which government can spend to make, panchayats and local government aware of these challenges. If you want to add, or if you want to contradict, you may.
Sure. No, Anilesh, it's a very astute observation. Punjab actually is, remember, now 20 years back, Punjab was one of our richest states, even in terms of per capita income, bread basket, the food basket of India and so on and so forth. Today, Punjab's per capita income is the same as that of Nagaland. Okay, so let us clearly acknowledge the fact that Punjab is one of the states which has lost out on India's growth story. It's very important for us to acknowledge that, to understand what is fundamentally the problem with some of the states we are dealing with. That's number one. Number two, you see, given it's an agricultural state, it has to carry out the kind of reforms from a long-term perspective, thinking, will it remain an agricultural state? Or does it need, why is it that Punjab has lost a very large number of SMEs to Himachal, Rajasthan and Haryana? Why have so many firms migrated? So we have to think from the economic model. There are issues. From the health side, there are bigger issues. And I think even without this pandemic, Punjab is a state for which public health, we have been greatly concerned from the entire mental health, substance abuse. There are issues which Punjab's public health needs to grapple with which are fundamentally, also because it's a border state, strategically, it's a very critical thing for the country. We have to deal with the problem, right? When a large part of a young population is getting wasted, and the productivity, particularly of labor, is very low. So those are longer term concerns. But within the pandemic, the first 2 months, Punjab did pretty well. However, what has happened lately is the testing has been so inadequate, that this is exactly the diagnosis which you have mentioned from your observation, is what we also send to the authorities there, that look, your test positivity rate, as it keeps increasing, it means that the infection is ahead of your knowledge. If you test 100 people and 5 people come positive, that is TPR of 5%. But tomorrow, if you test 110 people come out positive, then the infection is ahead of your knowledge, which you are getting from testing. That's why test positivity rate is such an important and a critical metric to keep observing and in the management of the pandemic. And today, the highest CFR, the case fatality rate, is highest in Punjab and rising, Anilesh. Not just highest, it is rising. That is why it's a cause that perhaps the cases which we are detecting are so late, because the testing is now happening so late that we're not able to say. Which is why you have to front load. You're absolutely right. This has to go down all the way to the block level. So community health center, primary health center, we need a drive. The kind of drive that UP and Bihar have done, which are not all, they are not the PCR tests, which is fine. But even if you can do the rapid tests, the antigen tests, and do them en masse, you're able to detect and you're getting a sense of what fraction of the population there has the infection. So we need to sort of be a little more proactive there. And I do know that people are concerned, but sometimes I think that our concerns are also, the narcissism of minor differences creeping. As long as we are better than Haryana, we are okay. Maharashtra will say, as long as we are better than Gujarat, we are okay. So this is, I'm seeing this across states, neighboring states, the ones which Andhra and Telangana have this comparison, that they're both reeling under, but as long as one is better than the other. So Punjab, I think, needs a sort of a reboot of the COVID strategy. The growth strategy is a much bigger problem in Punjab.
Looks like the states are, getting into the report cards of theirs, like the kindergarten report cards. My report card is better than yours, and then not sticking to the basics. Amongst us is a doctor. Dr. Deepika Singh is here with us. She would like to ask a very specific question to you, Shamika. Deepika, go ahead. Introduce yourself and go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Varika. So I'm a physician scientist and a public health specialist with a passion for health system strengthening. So I have a concern, and I would like to share this close group. So it is a well-known secret amongst the public health specialists that our health system ranks very poorly in terms of reporting deaths. So while RGI registers deaths, the health system actually gives a cause of death. And so it is a fact that India actually has a medically certified cause of death at 20%. So this means that if we have 100 deaths, you just multiply it by 5, and then you get the actual death for that particular disease. So the cause of death is actually highly underreported. So all the data needs to be looked at from that perspective and that lens too. So if we do that, what would happen is my question.
Hi, Deepika. Good to see you. It's a great question. It has weighed on, I think, on many of our minds for a while. Now, first of all, I think what needs to be done is we need to have much better verbal autopsy conducted on a lot of these cases. For the cause of death, currently under the COVID situation, if you're not tested, we don't know what cause it is, right? So clearly this becomes an added sort of a burden. But I'll tell you that, and I don't want to, in fact, that is a problem over which we have been writing for a very long time, that, cause of death is very important because it's such a large country that the policies or the health designs that you do for Kerala cannot be the same for UP, because the cause of death in Kerala is very different from the cause of death in UP. For instance, in UP, the biggest killer for women is diarrheal disease. Now that requires very different intervention and planning for the district hospitals or the CHC or PHCs than what Kerala needs, because it is mostly cardiovascular ailments there for women. So you see, the planning requires the information that you're talking about for us to actually provide people what is required, right? We are talking, that is a problem that exists, Deepika. Now, beyond that, when we are saying in the COVID situation, why we say that the COVID mortality, there is underreporting, there are measurement errors. 100% I agree with you. But the reason we still, when we compare, now comparing is not to feel good. Comparing is to understand what is the burden and how much is fear. So can we dispel, please? I think it is much more from trying to figure out what is the kind of intervention required from the economy or even from the health perspective. Now, unlike any other disease, including TB, we have not had this kind of scrutiny and testing ever. Right? In the last 20 years that I have been studying public health closely, and I'm sure a lot of the elders in the room as well will accept, we have not, barring maybe AIDS for a few years in the middle. But this kind of heightened scrutiny and testing, in fact, a lot of my doctor friends across the country and those who are, more in the lab side of things, they're saying, for the first time we are feeling important, because earlier people used to say, yeah, labs to aise some, the technicians do. That's not true at all. So we have more scrutiny. That's number one. Number two, when you look at cross-state variations, then in places like Delhi, where there is a lot of, first of all, I think sometimes we also have to be thankful that our political, this electoral politics and the political competitiveness of parties and the High Court and the fact that it is Delhi means the scrutiny is very high. So Delhi in the beginning was showing deaths which were low, but of course there was heightened scrutiny, more testing, and the death rates did rise. But despite that, Deepika, it is nowhere as close as what, any European country is showing today. Which is where we say that the fear, therefore, we have to go beyond the testing and the treatment. CFR is falling, most people are recovering, comorbidities matter, so can we please find out which comorbidities are particularly a problem? Put out that information. Let's deal with patient level details and let people be informed. But let's not get paralyzed with fear. Because I think that kind of petrification is leading to a huge damage for the economy. And the policy response, lockdown was very important in the beginning, because with the health infrastructure that you have, you can't possibly take any chance. So you needed to sort of, take your time and give yourself more time to prepare. So the initial lockdown was important. Perhaps even the second one can argue, but after that, subsequent lockdowns are not the solution. I'm sorry. Even today, you need highly localized, you need block level containment. Perhaps colony level. So resident welfare associations must be mobilized to handle this better. Otherwise, we are just, the whole livelihood debate is a very, we are not a rich society. We are a society which has just gotten out of poverty, let's say, and we still have about 5% absolute poverty. So we cannot afford not to work. So can we have a better sense of, from the health side, so that economic activity can be triggered to whatever potential we are capable of right now? right? So no big sledgehammer approaches anymore, highly localized micro containment. We have anyway ramped up testing more than any. So when learn to compare us with Pakistan and Bangladesh, it's not fair, simply because we are testing more than twice what Pakistan or Bangladesh are testing. When somebody tells you, when Kaushik Basu tells you that look, mortality is low, or people say they have flattened the curve, and you can flatten the curve today, Deepika, if we stop testing. Right? So I think what you're saying, I completely agree. I mean, we all agree. That is why we need to keep testing, put out information, let's get back to work as much as possible. Let's protect the elderly. Let's protect the vulnerable. But we have to get on to,
Shamika, we also have another question from R.K. Padi ji. He's a professor from IIM Kashipur. Sir, you wanted to ask a question? Please unmute yourself.
Sir, unmute, sir.
Okay, yes. So it's a good afternoon. Thanks for your wonderful presentations. In fact, we are doing a study for government of Uttarakhand regarding this impact of COVID on hospitality sector, mostly on hotels, homestay, the sports and adventures tourism. This is a draft report is going on now, and it's quite difficult for even to assess the loss because most of the time that data is not available, like from how many hotels are there. In fact, we have taken the data from the power supply company, Uttarakhand Power Transmission Corporations, then we correlated it with the consumptions and all. What we found out around 3,000 crore loss and 3,000 crore is turnover and 40,000 people are working. Now, at present moment, so the government wants to revamp this sector. So what should be the way for a strategy? Is the government want to give some incentive kind of thing to the sector? Because there are lots of sector, homestay is there, hotel is there, sports and adventurous tourism is there. There are lots of sectors. Leaving behind this religious tourism, of course, there is no need for any incentive. People, they will come to this Badrinath, Kedarnath, the Char Dham, there is no need. But particularly this sector, what kind of incentive actually you like to prescribe?
I think the best, and I would actually not separate religious tourism from that, because while we're all religious, we feel a little, I mean, faith can take us that far, but a leap of faith is, in the current times is a bit of a, I think right now the states, particularly, these are hardest hit sectors. And they're likely to remain hard hit for some time, which is why I think more again, the localized the packages and the solution, the better. So that's why I think at an all India level, we are not going to see packages for airlines or packages for hospitality, because it is very difficult to predict, frankly. So we can give support in the form of social security, perhaps enhance health insurance, etc., but nothing broad. States, however, can do a little bit more. And I think that is where, as much as we can incentivize the testing and the physical distancing. So if you have, let's say, 10 rooms, a homestay, you will not be able to operate in more than, let's say, 5, because that is social distancing, physical distancing requires that. So you will always work under capacity, but at least
I think again,
Yes.
Yeah, lost. But can I make a suggestion in this? In Uttarakhand, if they can do something about the registration of these tourist facilities like homestays or whatever it is, I think that can be a start at the block level, at the district level. All the tourist facilities should be at least registered. Today, much of it is unregistered, so they don't even know it.
Dr. Karmakar, they have already started doing this.
Already.
They are already doing this. They are pushing, more registration, more testing.
No.
She's back. Yeah, please go ahead, Shamika.
Please unmute yourself, Shamika.
okay. What other places are trying is, we can allow certain age groups. We can provide easy, free testing, provision of masks freely available, In fact, that is how you incentivize the firms, or in this case, the homestays or the hotels, to be able to tie up with the local authorities, so that these things. Iceland is doing that, by the way. The minute you come to the airport, everybody is freely tested, and within X number of hours, your tests are known, and then you go about it. Now, the authorities are also secured that somebody coming from Delhi, while they will pay for our services and will get some revenue, but they're not carrying the infection. That is the second thing. So we'll have to sort of work with the local public health infrastructure. And I think those costs, I think, can be easily borne by the state, given that right now there is zero revenue, right? Particularly in this sector.
Yeah.
So something which you said, Shamika, on this also to destigmatize the whole, the whole thing. You've said this today in your tweet as well, and I completely agree with this. This whole, putting up a kind of a stamp on somebody. So Professor Buddy, I recently had to send my own mother-in-law back to Dehradun, and it was a kind of a nightmare to even get through I'm from that state, I'm from Uttarakhand, to set, because of so many rules and regulations which they had to put
Anecdote of, mother-in-law is not allowed.
No, you can't take any chances, and so many.
Let's wind it up, because we are running short of time. I have various requests. People want to ask questions, but I need to, cut it short. But all those who want to ask questions, they can write it down and send it to am@cieu.in. I promise you, we will transfer them to Shamika, and as and when she will respond, we will reply back. So now let's request Dr. Ashwini Mahajan to give his concluding remarks. Dr. Ashwini Mahajan is an eminent economist. We know him. He heads Swadeshi Jagran Manch. So he wears two hats. One of an academician, economist, and second is of an activist. Dr. Mahajan. What happened?
Yeah, thank you, Anilesh.
Yes.
Yeah. In fact, it's always a pleasure listening to Shamika, and today I had the pleasure of listening to Mr. Kamarkar as well. So first of all, let me thank them for giving wonderful exposition of the whole issue of COVID. Shamika has elaborated on the life issue. And then in the last leg, she has also talked about how can we really live with COVID and go ahead in our economic activities. General lockdown is no solution. Yes, micro containment zones is a better idea. We have been doing better as compared to the rest of the world so far as the COVID issue is concerned. The recovery rate, the death rate, mortality rate has always been showing, has been giving us some solace, some relief. Now, enough is about the COVID and the issues relating to that. One thing I would like to tell here is that why we have to really put our heads together also to see why and how our mortality rate is low, how we have been able to deal with COVID, despite the fact that we are not so good in our public health facilities. I always say Indian people do, they do wonders. Anywhere they go, whether they go to, when they go to US, they rule the world, or they will go to any place, they are able to show their talent, their brains and everything. But for the first time, we have also realized that Indians have better immunity than the people in the rest of the world. Obviously, Asian in general have a better immunity. We have been able to do better also for the reason that uh, we have been given BCG injection in our childhood. We have also done better because of the immunity which we have because of our eating habits, our Ayurveda and other things. Now I want to go beyond this life issue, and I want to go to the livelihood issue. And यहाँ पर मैं एक बात शमिका जी, एक बात यहाँ कहना चाहता हूँ कि बहुत लंबे समय से जो 91 से लेकर अब तक जो अर्थशास्त्री लगातार हमें ग्लोबलाइजेशन का पाठ पढ़ा रहे थे, पिछले 6 महीने से मैं उनको सुन और देख नहीं पा रहा हूं ज्यादा, क्योंकि अब उनके पास कुछ कहने को है नहीं। वी हैव जो लॉकडाउन के बाद जिस प्रकार से हमने लोगों को नंगे पांव बिना किसी व्हीकल के पैदल अपने घरों में जाते हुए एक गठरी या बक्सा सिर पर उठा करके जाते हुए देखा, our all economists, those who have been saying that, one of my co-author who was working with the World Bank then had written an article in EPW that it's shining for poor too. I don't see globalization has been shining for poor. Some people, whenever I quote Thomas Piketty, people always bounce on us that why do you quote Thomas Piketty? His data is not correct. But I have always been asking for the data. If Thomas Piketty's data is not correct, you please give your data. We have seen enough about our rural areas. The difference between the rural and the urban areas, which was earlier on, the per capita income in the rural areas was hardly 8, urban area was hardly 7 to 8 times more than the rural areas. It has become around 12 times or even more than that. If you look at the condition of poor workers, the casualization has increased like anything. And these are not my figures. These are the figures given by the NSSO. Constantly increasing casualization of labor. And hardly any improvement in the real wages. If you see, the real wages curve is totally flat in the last 30 years. Then how globalization has been shining for poor? This has been the question which I was wondering with, and it has been haunting my mind all the time. And these economists, they used to say, to write books after books, articles after articles, that this globalization is shining for poor. This has been totally exposed when our workers from other parts of the country, they were going to their villages barefooted, on cycle, on foot, without any belongings. Had they been made better off, they would have taken something with them. Why they were going without belongings? They had been totally exposed. And in the last 20 years, the kind of trade which we had witnessed, and people like Arvind Pangaria, Jagdish Bhagwati, and many others, and even those who were in support of the giving doles to the poor, but they had never raised voice against the inequitable nature of the globalization. We have never seen people talking about it. But yes, this pandemic, though it is not a good thing for the humanity to really face this kind of pandemic, but it has given us several lessons by exposing the real face of globalization. And that's the reason that our beloved Prime Minister, though he had been showing love for globalization, suddenly he comes out with an idea of an Atmanirbhar Bharat. And this Atmanirbhar Bharat has a promise to improve the lots of those who are deprived, who are poor, who have lost jobs, those who have not been rewarded properly in this globalization. Yes, this Atmanirbhar Bharat will definitely help them. This and also the fact that the kind of teaching which was being made to us, yes, we have to live with the word. They will help us. But what has happened all these years? We will be building our industry. Industrialization would happen if we have a free trade. What has happened? With this free trade, our API industry was finished. Our electronic industry could not take off. Our telecom industry could not take off. Our chemical industry went down. Think of anything. Think of anything we could not industrialize. But the arguments were being made that, yes, we have to compete with the world. Yes, we have to compete with the world. But first of all, we have to exist. We were not existing even in most of the industries, in most of the sectors. So Prime Minister was very right when he came out with this idea. And we have shown to the world, yes, if we make a try, we can definitely do. We were not producing PPE kits, we were not producing masks. And people were saying that we can't produce ventilators. In just 2 months, we produced 60,000 ventilators. And the company which was producing ventilators, manufacturing ventilators, CEO of that company is known to me, is my friend. When it was being said that we can't manufacture ventilators, Kiran Majumdar-Shaw made a tweet. Yes, why can't we make ventilators? There is a company which is producing 5,000 ventilators in a month. Why don't you approach them? When they approached, that CEO of the company said, okay, I'm ready to help you in producing 1 lakh ventilators in a month. But I'm ready to give you design. So we proved to the world. And then our bureaucracy was so slow in opening the exports of the ventilators which were banned then. It took long time again to get this ban on export of ventilators to go. What I'm trying to say here is that if we so decide that we have to become self-reliant, we can do it. We have shown, and our study shows that there is hardly a 5 to 10% difference in the cost. Yes, our cost is little higher than the price at which we are procuring goods from China. But that shouldn't make any difference, because even if we put, say, 5 to 10% duty on such items, I'm not in favor of protection. And I think those economists, those who are saying that Modi is becoming too protectionist, I don't believe them. Because in the present scenario, the world trade scenario, in the WTO scenario, we can't afford to be protectionist. We can't impose 100%, 200, 300, 500% tariffs. Just a 5 to 10% tariffs can change the whole scenario of manufacturing in the country. And yes, we will do it. And this is only a momentary problem that yes, our workers had to go home. Now our industries, our construction sector is facing a huge shortage of workers. And as and when they are coming, they are being welcomed like anything in the industry. We have seen many, Shamika ji was giving the presentation where we found that many of the industrialists, they were giving salaries to their, even the private companies were giving salaries, were compensating the workers, but many of them, they could not. But I think the government has done a very right thing by slowly opening and unlocking the economy, unlocking the country by way of and obviously with a lot of cautions and with micro containment zones, we are doing better. But what I am in the end, I would like to say that it is not just we have realized, that India has realized the importance of being self-reliant. The whole world is realizing the importance of self-reliance, one. And secondly, there is a realignment in the whole world against China. And the China is the major factor in downfall of industry of more than 100 countries of the world. Not only India, even US, European countries, most of the developing countries lost their manufacturing because of China. And these so-called globalists, the globalization apologists, they kept on misguiding the world that yes, free trade is the only answer. I would say Swadeshi Jagar Manch has always been saying that we should trade, but equally we should engage in trade, but that should be a fair trade, not dumping, not through the export subsidies given by the other countries. And we have suffered a lot, but thank God, the government, the policy makers, and even the whole globe, including US, those who are the proponents of the globalization, they have started realizing the importance of being self-reliant. We want every country to be self-reliant. We want the international trade should go on, but that should be based on the equality. That should be based on the fair practices and not the unfair ones. We have seen that in the past, whether it was WTO agreement, we suffered because of the patent regime and various other reasons. But yes, even then we have learned to live with WTO. But rest of the international agreements, the free trade agreements, India has always been a loser. But time has come that policymakers should rise to the occasion, that international trade agreements are for the betterment of the life, betterment of the industry, betterment of Indian economy, and they are not to just engage in international trade agreements. So I think very soon we may come out of this pandemic, but we should again understand that international institutions like WHO, what I'm saying is many things have been exposed. And international institutions are also getting exposed, how they are aligning with the corporations, how they are aligning with the powerful nations, how they are aligning with the interest groups, how they are aligning with the lobbyists, and the way we have seen the WHO, China, and Bill Gates combined has been lobbying against the Russian vaccine or any other vaccine coming in their way. So we have to keep our eyes and ears open and see that nation first. Whatever is happening in the world, we have to look at it from the India's perspective, not from the perspective of the so-called globalization. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mahajan.
Thank you. It was really very interesting to hear Mr. Ashwini Mahajan.
Thank you.
A very good perspective.
Thank you. Now may I request, it was actually very enriching discussion which we have today evening. And I really want to thank Shamika. You have made all of us richer today. So thank you very much. And now may I request Dr. Unial to formally move a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Anilesh, and absolutely thrilled to get the sense of the data which you presented, Dr. Ravi. I think it was an exhilarating expose for all those four of us to try and understand and make sense of what is really happening and the madness. There is a method in that particular madness, and your illustration and your presentation, both on economy as well as on the pandemic, was eye-opening for a lot of us. Thank you, Dr. Karmakar, for your excellent review of Dr. Ravi's presentation, and I am very happy to know that you are working with SPJIMR today. That happens to be my old organization, so I think there is some connecting stuff. And as usual, of course, Dr. Mahajan, Ashwini Mahajan has the last word, on the Indianness side of it, and we are all, always charged with his talk about making and putting India first. And thank you all of you who have asked questions, Dr. Deepika, Mr. Joshi, and a few others who have been very, very kind in participating in this amazing discussion. So the whole idea of this particular series is to bring like-minded people to have a closed door, interesting, engaging discussion and understanding of this. We wish to continue this series to bringing in more experts like Dr. Ravi and others in the next coming months as well. And please follow our website, as well as you can write to am@ciu.in to send us your details, send your email IDs and everything, and we will keep you posted on the next one, wherever Anilesh and his team. Thank you, Aditya and his Talent Edge team, for hosting this and becoming our knowledge partners and giving us this amazing platform. And we wait for an amazing presentation and a discussion next Saturday, again, similar time. And on behalf of CIU and everybody else, we would really want to thank all of you. Back to you, Anilesh. Thanks.
Thank you, Shamika. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you. Can I have one last word? I think the discussions were great. Can a paper be made of all this?
Yes.
I think it deserves, because the various ideas which came through, I think it deserves a paper.
Actually,
I think it would be nice if you all could do it.
Actually, this might have skipped Professor Unial's.
Yeah, we wanted to say this, if we want to do this, yes. So this will happen. So everything is recorded, and we will come with a position paper, which will send it to the main speakers, you and Shamika and Dr. Mahajan as well, for their review. And once it comes out, it will be published on our website and shared widely.
Very good. I have two more points which I did not mention. I just wanted to make my mention. I wanted to inform the people, especially just one. I know. Just two small points.
Yeah.
One is the corruption amongst doctors has been increased in Bombay. I do not know about the rest of India, but I am seeing that